Hello and welcome to Behind the Bar with me, Cara Devine, and my charming co-host for this Australian whiskey series, Fred Siggins. If you have missed them, we've already done 2 whole episodes on the delicious juice that we have in front of us here. The first is on sort of the history of Australian whiskey right up until this boom that we're seeing now. And then the second is on the boom and all of the kind of awesome styles and things that you're seeing coming out of Australia. So definitely check them out if you haven't yet. There'll be some links below. And then for this one, we're gonna make a little drink and answer a couple of our questions that we over on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Cara Devine if you are interested. We asked if anyone had any questions for us. And luckily enough, one that came from Joe Lynch was actually any cocktails designed to feature specifically Australian whiskey. And I guess the thing with that is honestly there aren't really in terms of classics because Australian whiskey wasn't really around until kind of, well, I mean it was, as we covered in our number one. I did listen, but you know, as kind of widely available and as much of a thing basically as it is now. And honestly, cocktail culture wasn't massive as far as I can tell in Australia until quite recently compared to, for instance, in the States.
That's absolutely true, and I think that maybe there were some sort of what you would maybe now call like classic cocktails. During the Gold Rush era or around the time of Federation and stuff like that. But if so, they've been lost to time and haven't certainly made it through in the same way that your Manhattans and your Sazeracs have got that long and uninterrupted history.
Yeah. So what that does mean is that now, especially nowadays, when you are seeing some more affordable whiskey enter the market from Australia, so like your Starwards and your Gospels and things, it's definitely kind of lighting a little fire under Aussie bartenders and to kind of build drinks around that and kind of, you know, you're obviously seeing a lot of native ingredients being used and just basically being inspired by Australia. And I guess this little one that you're going to show us is sort of a little like Fred's vision of Australia, Fred's childhood in Australia in a glass.
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, certainly here in Australia, it's very common to see Australian whiskies on the cocktail list at Australian bars and especially at Australian whiskey bars. But again, you know, those are more sort of creative house versions of things or twists on classics using Australian whiskey. So with this drink, I came up with this a few years ago when Starward was pretty new on the market because I wanted to come up with something that I thought was an approximation of a classic cocktail, something simple and easy to recreate with easy to find ingredients, but with a sort of uniquely Australian twist, I suppose. You want to give it a go?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start with a couple of nips each. I'm gonna do 2 in the one shaker so that we can both have one. And I'm gonna do 2 shots each of the Starward Nova red wine cask Australian single malt whiskey. And then for our sort of acid element, I'm gonna go 20 mils per cocktail of freshly squeezed lemon juice. And then for the sort of sweet and flavor aspect, I'm going to use Cotty's apricot jam. This is definitely like the childhood part for me. I always think of apricot jam as being sort of an Aussie thing because you don't see it as commonly in other places. And yeah, this is a good Aussie brand that all Australians would recognise.
Although what was it? He was upset because he went to the shop and they only had one Australian apricot jam. What was the other one you were?
Yeah, I was actually looking for IXL. Nothing against Cotty's, but IXL was my favourite. And you know, as opposed to like doing any homemade ingredients, you could obviously sort of cook this down with some water to make a syrup if you wanted to, but I wanted to keep this pretty simple. So I'm just gonna do 2 like sort of nice big heaping bar spoons per cocktail of our apricot jam.
And this was what your after school snack?
Yeah, when I was after school, Nana would give me apricot jam sandwiches on white bread with margarine. Delicious. Also not surprising that I was a chubby child. And then just for a bit of spice and extra depth, we're gonna do 2 dashes per cocktail of Angostura bitters. And then we're gonna give this a bit of a shake. We got some ice here. And because the jam's just in big chunks like that, you definitely want to give this a nice hard shake. Fine strain this into our little chilled glasses over some nice block ice there.
Oh, it's such a good color.
It's great, right?
You said this was going to be a small drink.
Couple of little dried apricot garnishes there.
It's a bit fancier than I usually do here. My garnish game isn't as strong. I'm giving Jean-Felix a run for his money.
And then to finish it off, one of my favorite flavor combinations to go with malt whiskey, especially malt whiskey that's been aged in wine casks of any kind, is apricot and fresh sage. It's just one of those really beautiful combos that I think goes really well together. So a couple little fresh sage leaves there for some aromatics.
You know, like this is definitely something that I've kind of said on here before and talk about a bit when I was doing the bartending course, is like fresh herbs, man. I mean, obviously everyone thinks of mint, but sage, thyme, tarragon, like they look really pretty. It's usually a pretty different color to what you have in the glass, so it kind of gives that pop and a lovely aroma with minimal effort, which is...
Yeah, that's it. It's just one of those things that's worth playing around with, especially if you've got a bit of a herb garden going on in the backyard, or if you've just got leftovers from whatever it is that you've been cooking.
Yeah.
Have a crack. Anyway, so I call this one the Southern Hemisphere Smash, because it's sort of based on that kind of classic American smash style cocktail. Just a little bit of sweet, a little bit of sour, a little bit of herbs, a little bit of bitters. Easy, refreshing, nice kind of summery and fruity whiskey cocktail.
Oh, this looks pretty delicious.
You want to have a little taste?
Yes, please. Cheers.
Cheers.
That's yum.
You like it?
Yeah, I really like it.
Sage and the apricot, such a nice combo, hey?
Mm-hmm. And I know that you were saying that you originally did this drink with the Apricot cask from Starward, which is a little bit sweeter, but I reckon it's really nice with the red wine one.
Yeah, it works really well.
I mean, it still comes through really well, but it's not as like, you know, kind of bigger and sweeter as the Apricot cask would be, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely, because the apricot jam, using just like straight jam rather than making a syrup, it gives it a really nice
texture. It's like properly, yeah. Even though it's fine strained, it almost feels like you could chew it, you know? Mm-hmm. Excited to have my little dried apricot pieces later as well. Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
And another little question that we got, which is not really Australian whiskey, I guess specific, but it's from Ralph Fiennes. I'm assuming not like is it Ralph Fiennes?
I thought you were great in Harry Potter, if that's your name. And we really enjoyed the dig this week as well.
Yeah, we did.
Nice job.
How to drink whiskey for someone who doesn't like sipping it?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. Look, one of the things that I think has been a problem in the whiskey industry, especially sort of amongst those of us who kind of promote whiskey as a really fun and exciting drink, is that there tends to be this sort of gatekeeper attitude of like, if you're not just sipping it straight, then you're doing it wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no wrong way to drink whiskey as long as it's...
something like this, it's not, you know, it's just enhancing the characters of the whiskey. Like, of course, there are other flavors in there, but they're all kind of supporting it, and that's definitely how I like to make drinks on here. Is I'm never really trying to mask, you know, there's always like a pretty strong whiskey character or whatever base spirit it is. And obviously the more that you kind of drink things like that and introduce yourself and get used to being around those flavors, the easier I think it is then to move on to being like, all right, maybe just with a bit of soda, maybe just with a bit of water. Like I always kind of recommend if people drink mixed drinks, but they, you know, like a whiskey coke or whatever, but they kind of want to just basically gradually decrease the sugar. So maybe go from coke to ginger ale, and then to like just soda, you know, maybe with a squeeze of lime or something if you're still finding the flavor a bit confronting. And then, you know, if you want to kind of take it right back to just a bit of water and then potentially neat, but also don't feel like you have to. You know?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most common ways that I consume whiskey is in cocktails, you know, things like Manhattans and Old Fashions and Boulevardiers and Smashes. They're all amazing ways to drink whiskey. And like you said, a good whiskey cocktail will actually enhance some of those characteristics. But yeah, what I would say to people is, you know, if you're used to drinking whiskey and ginger, for example, or even if, you know, something else mixed with ginger ale, if you're a gin and tonic drinker, for example, try like 50-50 whiskey and ginger.
Yeah, rather than like a massive...
Than a whole glass.
Yeah.
But also just a good old-fashioned whiskey highball, you know, whiskey and soda, like you said, with a squeeze of lime or a lemon. Absolutely great way to drink whiskey and get a lot of the character and flavor of the whiskey, because soda doesn't have any flavor of its own, but it's going to be a little bit diluted and softened and be a little bit more approachable rather than just, you know, going straight in. Also, smoky scotch and Coca-Cola, absolutely delicious.
Oh, you don't want to know, like, my suggestion of the smoky cokey in our How to Order Whiskey Like a Boss got a lot of derision from people, kind of gatekeepers like that, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, again, obviously, I'm not saying, you know, take a really beautiful and expensive bottle of whiskey that people have taken lots of time and effort to make and like pour it down the sink or just neck it. But, you know, also, like, it's booze at the end of the day. Like, it's fun. It's meant to be something that you enjoy with people, that you kind of make memories with. And if you want to, you know, obviously if you have a whole bottle of something, again, I think I suggested it with Lagavulin. I'm not saying drink the whole bottle of it like that, but try it. Try something new, you know?
Sure. And you know, I've been lucky enough over my career to meet many, many people who make whiskey for a profession, as well as those of us who sort of sell it and promote it. And every single one of those people has told me that the main reason that they make whiskey is so that people drink it and enjoy it. You know, those people who are actual distillers, who are actual craftspeople out there, you know, putting their heart and soul to run the stills every day, are not really concerned about how you drink it as long as you're enjoying it. So that's what I would say.
All right, another question. I guess we did kind of cover this, but Tony Cabot asked for us Yankees, are there any Australian whiskies commonly available over here? And I guess, yeah, the answer is Starward, so the one that we used here. Not sure if you'd be able to get all of their expressions. That's definitely something that we could check for you. But as far as I'm aware, it's pretty commonly available there. Have you seen it in...
I mean, look, you're not going to be able to probably walk into your sort of local pharmacy and be able to buy a bottle of Starward, but in specialty bottle shops that have decent whiskey selections, you should at least be able to find the Starward Nova and the Twofold, which is their blended expression.
Yeah. Which is also maybe actually a good, and it's, you know, if you do like, basically their Starward Twofold is their version of kind of a blended whiskey, so, you know, Dewar's, Johnny Walker, that kind of idea. But if you are, I mean, completely, like, you may well be a single malt drinker in the States, but if you do kind of maybe like your American whiskies, that's a really good kind of little segue, I think, as well, because it's that, you know, kind of nice and sweet and like quite accessible.
Absolutely.
Because some of the Aussie ones can be pretty, like, you know, big ABV, sort of big sherry influence and such, whereas that one's a little bit more approachable. Yeah,
made with a fair amount of very high quality Australian wheat grain as well as malted barley. So yeah, if you like your wheated bourbons, it's probably a good one to take a crack at.
Yeah. And then really other than that, it is going to be, yeah, I think, again, you can get a bit of Sullivan's, a bit of Lark, like, you know, I'd assume maybe some other ones if you really seek out like proper speciality whiskey shops in sort of, you know, your bigger cities. So it might take a little bit of internet research depending where you are, because it's a bit of a minefield, I think, to import to the States, because
it is unfortunately 50 states, 50 different sets of rules, so it makes it pretty difficult for small producers like obviously what most of us are here in Australia to get over that hump.
Yeah.
But we're working on it.
And I think there are some that are getting to a tipping point of being big enough to kind of, you're definitely seeing it with gin. I know that Four Pillars you can definitely get in the States now. Mr. Black that we've done quite a lot of work with.
Archie Rose, I would probably not be surprised if they're not already there, then they'll be there soon, I would say.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's, if you want to enough, I'm sure you'll be able to find something. And then we're probably just going to have one last one here and then jump on to finish the rest over on Patreon. Feel free to follow us on the link if you want to sign up and see it. Holly Monster asks, what are the characteristics of Australian whiskey? My hubby is curious about the barrels used for Australian whiskey, locally grown and or made or imported.
It's a really good question, and I think that given the stage that the Australian whiskey industry is at, we probably haven't settled on a broad style in the same way that you can sort of make some generalizations about American whiskey, Scotch whiskey, Japanese whiskey. It's hard to make generalizations about the Australian whiskey industry because there are so many small producers and because it's really pretty experimental at this point. But a couple of the big things that we can rely on is, like I mentioned, the quality of the Australian grain that we're growing is very, very high. And Australian whiskies tend to be pretty grain forward. You know, you can taste the quality of the barley or the wheat or the rye. We have access to a lot of really beautiful red wine casks here in Australia because of our great wine industry. So that's becoming a bit of a signature of Australian whiskies. We also have beautiful fortified wines that are produced in Australia as well, of a very, very high quality. So the fortified casks that we're using, the port style and sherry style casks, are really good and give you a lot of flavor, a lot of punch. So, you know, given that climactic difference, our whiskies tend to be aged for a shorter period of time, or pretty cask forward, you know, and have got some good sort of powerful oak characteristics to them, more like what you would expect from American whiskey.
The one that I found really interesting that I didn't know until you explained it to me is like the ABV in Australia when it's being aged goes up, whereas in Scotland it goes down, right? So like you see some cask strength whiskies here are like almost 70%, like blow your head off stuff.
Absolutely, and sometimes that's in only sort of 5 or 6 years in the cask.
Yeah.
So again, in that way, it's closer to Kentucky because you see bourbon whiskies go up in ABV over time, whereas, as you mentioned, in Scotland, you'll see whiskies drop in ABV over time, and that has to do with relative humidity. But yeah, that means cask strength Australian whiskies, which there are a fair amount of, at least in the local market, they're pretty serious.
But even, you know, stuff, I do think that there can be, and I don't want to, you know, obviously hot isn't necessarily a good thing when it comes to whiskey, but I do feel like there's a good amount of like kind of spice and yeah, you can generally feel the alcohol content of Australian whiskey the same way that, again, you can with like your bigger like Aussie wines and things. It's definitely, they do tend to have that kind of reflect the climate in that sense, you know.
Sure, and reflect the Australian personality to an extent. I think they're nice and punchy. They're going to let you know they're there, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think that Australian whiskey is really yet at a particular point where you would call it particularly refined, you know, in the same way that you might describe Japanese whiskey that way, or certain sort of Highland single malt scotches. It's definitely like big and rustic and bold.
And delicious.
And delicious, yeah.
Well, I think that's quite enough for now. We are going to continue this little chat over on our Patreon page. So that's at patreon.com/CarraDivine if you did feel like getting access to some more content like this, or, you know, just basically helping us support the channel, then we're obviously always very appreciative of that. But for now, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Fred, for being here and for the drink. It's not often he makes me a drink, you know. Cheers.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.